Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's Tech Tuesday. My name is Vanessa with ITS Communications, and today we're going to be doing a part two of our Microsoft Loop demo that we did last year when we first introduced the application. So thanks to all of you for joining us today to learn even more about Loop. Before we get started, I just wanted to let everyone know that I do have everyone's microphones muted. We are expecting quite a few people to log in, and we just want to avoid background noise as Josh Gorel, our host, presents today. But if you have any questions at any point during the session, please feel free to put those questions in the chat. If you'd like to come off the mic to ask your question, feel free to raise your hand in the Zoom taskbar at the bottom, and I'll unmute you when we have a moment to do so. I'm also recording today's session, so later on you'll get an email from me with links about all the Loop discussions we talk about today with resources and guides, as well as the recording so that you can watch it later and even share it with some colleagues who may not have been able to attend today. So without further ado, I am going to hand this over to Josh Gorel, who is our O365 product manager and kind of wealth of info about all things Microsoft. So thanks again, Josh, for joining us today for another Tech Tuesday.
Absolutely. Thank you, Vanessa. And thanks everyone for joining. If you guys have joined my previous session on Copilot Part 2, this is going to be similar. So I gave this disclaimer at the beginning of that one as well, where this is not going to be as structured as some of my Tech Tuesdays. I really want this to be a collaborative session. So I always mean this, but I extra mean it today. If you have any questions, any use cases you'd like to share, anything like that, please either put it in chat or raise your hand and we'll unmute you because this is really the point of the session is to be collaborative. But before we do the in-depth collaborative stuff, I will give kind of a quick 30,000 foot review of what Loop is if you didn't catch my first Tech Tuesday. And we'll talk about anything that has changed since last time, or maybe some things that we missed. So, quick agenda, we're going to talk about what is Loop. We're going to talk about the three pieces of Loop. We're going to do a quick start guide so you guys can get started today, right in the session if you'd like, if you haven't yet. We're going to talk about what's new since the last session, which I think was May or June of last year. And then we'll do the demo, Q&A, and use cases. So I am going to kind of speed through this first part. Please stop me with any questions. I made this little word cloud of what is Loop, and think about these words when you think of Loop, right? So collaborative, teamwork, multiple platforms, all team members. You see teamwork again, real-time collaboration, centralizing. These are kind of the words that really you should think of when you think of Loop. And to put context around that, this is what Loop is, right? So Loop is a collaborative app meant to enhance teamwork and productivity. It's meant to be a central location for all of information you have across your team, right? So yes, note taking, but also linking documents into a overarching project, linking task items, and it's meant to be platform independent. As long as you're within the 365 platform, it doesn't matter what application you're in within that platform, right? So if you're in Loop itself, if you're in Teams, if you're in Outlook, doesn't matter. It's meant to be the same information across the board. Promotes teamwork, centralizes all that information and task. You can see how all of those terms that I highlighted kind of come together here. Loop is three pieces. It is a workspace, it is a page, and it is a component. So starting smallest, the component is where you're actually going to be interacting with data. You're going to be typing things within a component. You're going to be adding a table to a component, at mentioning people in a component. All of those components are collected into a page, and all of those pages are collected into a workspace. So more context around here, components are the smallest piece and workspaces are the largest piece, just like we talked about last time. This is the three ways of organizing Loop data: components, pages, workspaces. If you haven't used Loop yet, this is the same slide as last time, except for this domain change, right? So there's still forwarding in place. I think I talked about in the Copilot Tech Tuesday as well. Microsoft bought the .microsoft domain, which is really cool. Only they can use that domain, which is really cool. So loop.cloud.microsoft is now the official, even though it looks weird, it is the actual URL. It's no longer .com, it's .microsoft. and you'll know you're on the right place if you see that .Microsoft. Everything else is the same though. You can set up a workspace for testing. You can use your templates and all of that we talked about last time. Slash commands for quick adding of tasks, images, tables, etc. At commands for at mentioning documents, people, or components. Real-time collaboration, we'll kind of take a look at that in the demonstration. And then the security, we're also going to permissions and security. We're going to talk about that later as well. So new things we missed. This is where we're going to talk about some new stuff. We're going to see all of this in the demo. So don't worry if you don't fully understand what I'm driving at here yet. But first and foremost, we now have a um, personal workspace, if you will. So it is by default, everybody has one. It's this cool little sunglass guy by default. And you can go into that workspace to add your own notes. You cannot share that workspace with anyone. It is yours and yours alone. You can share pieces of that workspace, so the pages or the components like we talked about, with others as needed, right? But the whole workspace itself is your own. When you add a new page in there, it'll be default just your own, and you can share it with others on an as needed basis. Great for personal notes, just sticky notes that you wouldn't normally type, you could put here, things like that. Um, this isn't necessarily new, but a couple of questions that I've got since my last conversation with you guys. Where to see where items are shared. So as I mentioned, you can live collaborate in Loop, you can live collaborate in Outlook, and you can live collaborate in Teams, right? So where do you see, or how can you see where those components are uh, utilized? So this button here will take this kind of smaller pane, which we'll see here in a second, that shows the shared locations for this one page. And it shows that it is in a couple of workspaces. Well, actually, one's a workspace, this page, and this Outlook uh, e email, if you will. You can also do it in Calendar. So that is super helpful to see where your component is in. But you can also see who has access to that component by this button here. You can see that my test user and Vanessa here has access to that. Great to keep an eye on that because as designed, you can share different pieces of a page with different people, right? So seeing what people have access to on one page, that button is super handy to make sure everybody has the appropriate level of access. Speaking of that, we're going to touch on version history a little bit. I think we might have talked about it a little bit last time, but we're going to talk about how it interacts with components. And so stay tuned on that one. And we're going to do a demonstration of recap as well, which I think is somewhat useful for some use cases. So with that, we're going to jump right into a demo. Anybody have any questions before I do so?
No questions
I,
on
sh I should have put in a form or something, but just wondering if maybe people could either use reactions or maybe put in the chat how many of the people on the call here, I see there's 72 of us, 73 of us, how many have never touched Loop before? Never even went to the URL, never downloaded the app, has no idea what I'm talking about. Is there anybody who is totally net new to Loop? Maybe put in the chat or thumbs up, or I see a couple of them. Okay, that's totally fine. Vanessa, if you can maybe link the previous presentation I did on Loop, it'll go into much more details about the things that I just jumped into, right? So that was a 30,000 foot view to jump in, but that last presentation, everything is still applicable there. So
Absolutely. I will make sure also in the follow-up email to add that recording. So if you missed our first demonstration, you'll have some context as to what we're talking about today.
perfect, thank you. So with that, all of that stuff is applicable. So take a look at that video. But to get started, again, you'll want to go to loop.cloud.microsoft. You can also access it if you're just in a different application with the little Rubik's Cube menu up here. You'll find it in your long list. If you haven't touched it yet, it may not be here. Just click on this button, you'll find it. But quick way to get there is just loop.cloud.microsoft. It'll look something like this. You can see I have a bunch of demonstration workspaces here. You can also at the top click on your recent components and pages and see what you've touched last, which is super handy. We'll touch on meeting notes here in a minute, so I'll just leave that be for now. But when you go to the Loop homepage, right, the landing page, to create a new workspace, hit the plus button here at the top. You can hit create new. The other way to do it is if you're in the workspaces section of Loop, there's a create new workspace right here, and that will lead you to this screen, which I already pre-populated for sake of time. You can create a cover photo. I just made it two because this is our second iteration of this. You give it a logo, again, made it a two, and then you could give it a name. Sensitivity label we don't have, but that is eventually coming, so just don't worry about that for now, but keep an eye on it. And then you can share your whole workspace with people, right? So this would be if you want to share um, everything within this collection with a person, right? So if Vanessa and I are going to be working on this, uh, everything within needs both of our eyeballs on it, if you will. This is where you'd want to share so everybody is on the same page. But then you can also share pages or you can share components with individuals as well. So I'll go ahead and hit create. And now I have a brand new, fresh workspace to interact with. By default, it'll give you a page called Untitled here. So this is my first page in my workspace. So it will rename this over here in the hierarchy. Just like OneNote, you can do subpages. So you can do that if you'd like. You can open this page separately if you'd like. We can share a link to this page itself, right? So if we wanted just this page to be shared with somebody, we can do that. You can rename it, style it, rearrange it. All of this is kind of generic. Template is really good too. So if this was a reoccurring page, if you will. You can save this as a template once you have it just the way you like it with different headers, or you can use one from the template gallery. You can see that here. It shows you kind of the most used ones, but you can click the template gallery to get some inspiration. I really like the meeting notes one, though I don't love every piece of it. So you can start with this template, but then customize it and save the template, just for your own use cases, if you will. But these are really good to get started with to give kind of some ideas of how to use Loop. So if we want to, we can say use this template, for instance, and it's going to change the whole page, if you will, to meeting notes. That leads me to one thing I wanted to talk about, which was version history, right? So if I didn't want to do that, you can see the version history I have on this one page. It's been saving all along. So when I clicked that, it overrode my awesome work of that name. So I can go back here to the beginning, whichever piece along the way, and hit restore. And it will restore to that previous version. So you can see here it was the version that had all the data in it before it cleared it out. So I didn't go back far enough. We can do that too. Maybe here. I don't know. We'll see. But version history is super handy if you override things, just like in OneDrive, SharePoint, things like that. Super handy. When you're in a page, you can use the slash command, or you can hit the plus button over here. Does the same thing to get your list of types of objects, as I'll call them, you can put in here, right? So there's subpages, there's tables, there's checklists, there's bulleted lists. There's a ton of stuff in here. We could talk all day about this, which we don't have time for, so I won't. I'll just start typing some information. And you can see that Vanessa has this page open. So again, real-time collaboration is key for this, right? So I have her in here and she can go in here and start typing stuff as well live, right? So she's actually doing this as we speak. I think this is super handy. So the other thing that I really like here is if I went down here, I could make like a checklist, right? And I could say, this is items to talk about in our next one-on-one. So maybe I want to take this, whoops, I want to take this and I want to say, let's create a loop component out of this, right? It'll do this little animation. It'll make a loop component for me here. And then let me go back to my checklist. Thing one, thing two, thing three, right? Now that this is a component, this technically in the back end is a separate page, right? So if I click on component, it's going to open up a new tab. Of course, it's going to ask me to sign in because why wouldn't it? It's going to open this as a new page. This is a big question mark that I get all the time, right? Where if you're going into version history, why doesn't my component update? And this is the reason. It's your component is technically a separate page because you can have separate permissions on that component. So if I go back to this is my first page, right? I can do version history here, but it's going to be everything outside of this component. Think of this component as just a link at this point, right? If I go back to the component page, this will have its own version history. So you have version history separate for each one of your components, which is actually very handy. So if you want to keep this B but change the formatting around it, for instance, you can do so. The other thing I really like for people who haven't touched Loop yet is the power of this component, right? So I can copy this component. It's going to say link copied, right? And I can go here and I'm just going to start a conversation with Vanessa. If I hit paste, it's going to just put it in there. But if I give it just 1 second, it's going to put the component in here in Teams. So now after I give it a second, if I hit enter, it's going to load that component live in Teams. So Vanessa will get the notification that, I just sent her this message, right? Just like any other message. But now she can actually interact here within this component, right? So I can maybe add a thing for, and this will update back to uh, here as well, live, right? Everything's real time. You can do that here in Teams. I could do that in an email. It actually is live in an email. It's super cool. We could show you that real quick while I'm talking. You can do it live in a calendar invite, which I think is super cool. So if I wanted to, I could say things we are going to talk about, ignore my typos, in our one-on-one, right? And I could paste that component in here as well. And I could send that to Vanessa. And even if it's in draft mode here, I could say thing 5 and note that it's going to be updating over here, right? Even if it's in draft mode, even if it is sent, which I think is super cool, right? As soon as you send an email, it's over, right? I'm gonna be like, oh man, I should have added thing 6. We're really going to need to do thing 6. We're gonna need to do thing 7. Now I have to send another email to Vanessa with the same information, and now there's an email storm back and forth. It's a real pain. So if I just go back to my sent items, I can look in here and I can see her live adding things as we speak in sent items in Outlook. I think this is super cool. It makes it so sending an email isn't static anymore, right? If you use a loop component, you can check to see where we are here. You could check to see where we are back here, or you can check to see where we are here, right? No matter where you are within the platform, any application, you'll have the most up-to-date information and nothing is just static anymore, right? Which I think is super, super handy. So that's kind of a conversation about components. Components, this purple blue banner is where you can copy and paste. So you have to make things a component before you can do what I just showed. But I think it's really handy to have the most up-to-date information. So we talked about in my slides the shared locations. If I click on this, now I can see that these components are shared in a variety of locations. Once this updates, it'll show that the team is in here as well, and it'll show that the email is in here as well. I have an example of that if this one's being slow today. But it's nice to actually show where all of this information is. Yeah, it's being slow today, so let me show you this one that I did earlier so you can see what that looks like. Eventually, you will see where all your components are. So you'll see, okay, I did send that to Vanessa in an email. I sent this to Vanessa in a Teams message, etc. So you could see all of the locations where that component was shared. Also, this is where you can see who has access to that specific component. So again, you can permission people here at the workspace level. You can permission people here at the page level, or you can permission people just with this component, because technically, if you recall, that component is a page, right? So you're in effect giving them access to just that one page. So any step of the way, you can give them access. You can remove access just by clicking on that little icon and seeing who has access currently. Um, finally, I think, or two more things I wanted to show before we open it up. We talked about version history, but the other thing I really like is the recap section here. You could go in and hit create new recap, and I could say at Vanessa, I added some items for our next one. Please review and let me know if you have any questions, right? So that'll send her a notification here in this notification section that I sent her or I mentioned her in a recap. It's kind of nice to let her know that, hey, you need to check this and do something before, our meeting. This is kind of think of this as like a link to version history almost. So if you make a change, you can add in here and let your group know what you changed, why you changed it, things like that. Kind of handy to do that. And then finally, a question I get asked a bunch is the meeting notes. So this was kind of broken, I think, last time we talked, or maybe didn't even exist last time we talked. But it's super cool now, and I wanted to highlight it because I think it's going to be a really nice use case. So for meeting notes, what we can do, this is for Teams meetings, FYI, which I prefer. So if you have a Teams meeting, which I have here, a demonstration of a Teams meeting, um, normal Teams meeting, you can click on the event from your calendar, you can hit join, you can click this button, whatever. But if you hit this little arrow icon, it'll show you the full details of this meeting. So you have a separate chat for the meeting, which you probably are familiar with. Any of the shared items within that meeting will be linked here, but specifically this recap button. So some of this we don't have access to yet. So specifically AI notes and app mentions, we don't have access yet. However, transcript, if you turn on the transcript in your meeting, you'll see the transcript here, which I think is very handy, but also notes. So if you click this notes button, it'll be linked to this Tech Tuesday demo, right? And I can add notes straight from here. And you can add things like an agenda, like recap, loop quickly, show new stuff, open for discussion, right? We can add meeting notes here as we go along. We talked about this and that and another thing. I cannot type today. And then follow-up tasks, right? So if we wanted to, we can have a list of follow-up tasks of, what people need to do after this meeting is over, right? Um, you can see who has access. You can see where it's shared. Everything I just talked about remains the same. You can add people here. You can add files here. Maybe I'll mention Vanessa, and it's going to say, hey, Vanessa doesn't have access because she's not in this meeting since it's just a demo on the team side. So let me go ahead and hit the plus and just share and notify right here. So I don't have to go into the settings necessarily. I could just mention her and put her in here. And I'll see that she just joined and she can add stuff as she sees fit. The benefit of using this is how it links to this event, right? So if I go back to calendar, I could go back to this test that I did yesterday with my test account, go in here, hit the recap, and I could see the notes that I took yesterday right in here, right? Even the follow-up tasks, right? So I can right in here, I don't have to remember where this note lives. I know that we had the event on this day and time, right? So I could just scroll through my calendar, click that event, go to recap, hit notes, and see the notes that we took together in that meeting. Um, Also, you can, within Loop, see meeting notes. So if I click on meeting notes, it's going to show me sorted by week what notes that I took. Now, obviously, this is my test account, so there's not a lot here, but this is the note that we just looked at yesterday that I tested with. And here's the one that we're working on today, where Vanessa is typing. So again, just like we talked about before, whether you're in calendar, whether you're in email, whether you're in Loop, doesn't matter. All of that information is live and will be shown together. Okay. So, with that, I'm going to take a break and take a look at some questions we have in here because I do see we have a bunch. So let me just scroll through. Um, how do you get items into the meeting notes tab? Okay, I just talked about that, so that one should be good to go. Let me know if you have any extra questions on that. Can you invite Teams groups or use listservs? I believe you can use Teams groups. I do not believe you can use listservs. So Teams groups would be the way to go. Apologies if I missed this. Does this work? Okay, good question. When we talked last, they did not have sharing capabilities externally yet. I believe that has been corrected as of now, or not corrected, but just added as of now. So, our approved institution should have access to Loop at this point to share, assuming that their institution does have Loop enabled. So if they have disabled it, obviously you can't share it with them. Do you have to share it with someone in Loop before being able to paste it into the email? Great question. The answer is not necessarily, right? So if I wanted to go back to this page that we've been working on, for instance, right? Let me copy this component again. Maybe we want to add my boss in here. So Raf, who I think is on the call, I'm going to say, Raf, adding you to this one-on-one, which now it's not a one-on-one, but whatever. If I paste this in here, it's going to yell at me, right? And it's going to if I click on it, it's going to say, hey, this person does not have access. So at this point, I can either give them access or I can remove the component. So it's kind of like a handy way to, warn you that, hey, this person isn't going to have access. I can change it to recipients of this message can view or can edit, hit apply. Now, if I send that to Raf, he will have access to the component. That's a great question. And I like how it does that too. You can keep an eye on, if I paste this in a location, does everybody who has access to this email have access to this component? I think it's very handy that way. If an email is forwarded with a component in it, does it get shared to others? That's also a very great question. Yes, it does, but it looks weird and they won't have access. But if they don't already have access. So if I would forward this to somebody who doesn't have access, for instance, my actual account, it's again going to yell at me and say, hey, this person does not have access. If I ignore that warning and I hit send, it's going to yell at me and say, hey, this person doesn't have access. Are you sure you want to do this? If I ignore all of those warnings, basically what happens is I will just get a link that says component.loop or whatever the name is, .loop, right? So let me open this up and see if I can show you that. It'll look like this. So it basically is like, hey, you got this, but they didn't give you access, so you can't see it if you ignore all of those warnings. So you do have to permission them appropriately, but it'll try to help you along the way. How do we get a working URL for a specific workbook? We want to add a link to the Team Loop workbook. Oh, okay, that's a good question. I don't know that I know the answer to that off the top of my head, Vanessa or Veronica, so I might have to reach back out to you on that one. I don't know that you can link a workspace as a whole. Well, that was a bad example because that's my workspace. I might have to reach back out to you on that one. I don't know that you can do that. You could try this nasty looking link at the top, but I'll work with you offline on that one. Is Copilot not available? That's a good question. Raf answered that one. We don't have the full version of Copilot yet. That should be coming. Curtis, that is a great point there. The transcript, you can use transcript today in Teams meetings. And given policy regulations, I'm not a policy professional at WCM, but assuming we're in accordance with all of that, you can feed that transcript into Copilot to generate meeting notes for you. Veronica, yeah, I love the notes too. It wasn't broken necessarily. It was just coming last time we spoke, I think, and it's super handy. It kind of replaces the meeting notes that used to exist in Teams meetings, which was powered by the wiki, and is gone nowadays. So it's super handy. I love that it's organized by week, so you could just put it right in here, and then. Veronica, I know you're a power user of Loop based on our conversations. You can import this into you can component a if you will, this information and put it in a workspace, right? So you could say, okay, this is the demo that we took, but this really relates to Tech Tuesday. You could link it into there if you want, or just leave it in the meeting notes if it's just general. Also, keep in mind at mentioning isn't just for people, right? So I can at mention components in here too. And it'll link to that component so I can go and access it in this page, right? So this is the one I just worked on. I can link it to here if I want to. Let me see what it is. Template of sorts, not attachment. Oh, yes. So we didn't talk about that here. I think we talked about this last time, but you can actually create a new page, link, or upload a file. Keep in mind that this will be saved in OneDrive, right? But if you add a link, you can add a link to um, pretty much anything, right? So you could say, Google, this link, oh, right, because it needs to be this link can be pretty much anything you want, right? So if there's web pages that you use all the time, you can link them here. It is just a link, but it's nice to have it all in this location. So new person joins the institution, we add them to the workspace that's applicable. They have all their links right at the top, kind of handy, right? But you can also link in the same way documents, right? So I don't have one handy here, but if I had a Word document, all I have to do is grab that URL from you know, M365, just like I did there, paste that URL here, and it'll be linked right at the top so you can open it in the web. Um, can you assign one task to multiple loops? I'm not sure I understand that question. The task is assigned to a person, not the page itself. You could put a planner board on multiple loops if you wanted to, or you could component a task list to multiple loops. So for instance, if I wanted to, um, I could do one of these. Thanks for all the questions, by the way. This is exactly what I wanted this meeting to be because we already gave a kind of a general conversation about this. So if I had a task list, I could componentify this, and then I could copy this and paste it in this one, right? So only some people have access. Again, same thing applies. You want to make sure that we insert and share, but now this task list is on a different page. So you can do that if you want to keep a running task list going. That's totally something you can do. If I make a change here, it'll change there. So you can link components together that way. But if you assign it to a person, that will still apply. So you assign it to people, not necessarily the loop page itself. Can you collaborate with folks outside the institutions? If that does not work, let me know because I believe it should work as of now. So outside institutions, as long as they're approved for sharing, should be fine in Loop as of now. How do you insert files? I wonder if I have any so I can show that. Let's see. This is my test account, so we'll see if I have one. Oh yeah, this is one that I gave for Copilot. So I could just go to my OneDrive, right? I can copy the link to this PDF that I demoed for my Copilot demonstration a couple weeks back. And then I can go back to Loop. Let's go here, add a page, or sorry, add a link. That's the address, and I could say that. So now that this is in OneDrive, if I click on it, it'll open that specific page. This could be a PDF that's in OneDrive. It could be a Word doc. It could be Excel, whatever is in OneDrive. For sharing a webbook link, you can go to Loop homepage. Oh, okay. There you go. So Veronica, Casey has a way to share a workbook link in there. So that's a great call out. Thank you, Casey. And I think I'm caught up. So we have 10 minutes or so left, which is perfect. Keep the questions coming, or if you guys want to see anything specific in Loop, I think I covered the new stuff that I wanted to talk about. So if anybody would like to unmute and share any success stories, any failures with Loop, it doesn't have to be necessarily a question if you just want to share with the class, or if you have any further questions, this is your time, so open it up.
Hey, Veronica, I have unmuted you. You should be able to come off the mic to ask your question.
Okay, I actually have a question for Casey. Could you demonstrate how to do that? Because this is not something that I can see on my screen, but I may be missing something.
So I think what he's doing, Casey, you can absolutely, correct me if I'm wrong, but since I'm already sharing here, he's saying if you go to the Loop homepage, so just click loop.cloud.microsoft, right?
Mhm.
Hover over these three dots. Whoops. Actually click the three dots, not hit three dots like I just did. And he's saying if you go to members,
Ah, yes, I got that. Thank you so
mhm,
much. Thank you. This is fantastic.
absolutely. Thank you, Casey, for that. I didn't even know that. So gold star from Josh today for Casey.
Hey Josh, it looks like there was another comment that popped up, a question. Can you help clarify when to use Loop versus SharePoint workflow?
Um, okay, so that's kind of apples and oranges a little bit. So a SharePoint workflow, like for approvals and what have you, we might have worked together on that in the past. That is more of an automation step. Loop is for collaboration in general. So I guess to answer your question, um, and correct me if I'm not understanding correctly, but you can have a task list here that is maybe, for instance, approve this thing, right? And I can assign it to Vanessa, right? And she can go in and approve it, right? If she wants to, add any notes in here if she wanted to, right? So you could use this for an approval type workflow if you wanted to. But that's separate from like a list type workflow, right? So this can be integrated into like a Power Automate workflow, but not necessarily the same thing I think you're talking about there. So we might need to take that one offline. Um, John Young, can you show how to share a component again? Yes. So on any one of these pages here, I'm just going to pick a different one. If I have some stuff, you hit this little button here and you can do the reaction stuff. You can move it around, whatever, but create loop component is a button if it's not already one, and you'll see this little animation. From here, you can see who has access to this page, or you could copy the component straight from here. By default, existing people will have access. I usually just leave that be because if I'm giving it to somebody who doesn't already have access, it's going to yell at me and tell me that anyway. So if I go in here, paste it to Veronica, because this is a separate page, um, it's going to do that security check anyway. But I gave her access to the workspace, so it doesn't give that, error, right? So I could just send that away. But if I try to share it with like Raf, I don't think I gave him access, so it should yell at me. Yes. So it'll tell me that they don't have access and I can either grant them access, or this is a great way to look at it and say, ooh, should this person actually have access? This has actually not necessarily saved me because I don't really have any sensitive data that I work with, but it's a great double check if you have a big group of people, right? So this is a simple example one-to-one, but this could be a group of people that I'm pasting in here. And if I get this error, I can say, ooh, okay, maybe I do need to think about this specifically with sensitive data. And I can go up to here and see who is a member of this chat and make sure that everybody is appropriate in seeing that information. Um, yeah, I typed this in because I'm not sure why you're getting that error. Microsoft.com. Yeah, that URL looks correct. So yeah, I would try a different browser. Great questions. Anybody else have any use cases questions? I know, Veronica, wherever you went, I saw you on here somewhere. Hopefully you're still here. I know you use it a lot, so not to put you on the spot, if you want to discuss what you like and don't like, that would be cool. Or if anybody has any questions, concerns, success stories to share with the class.
Hi, yeah, I'm here. I actually like Loop a lot because it allows me to express a bit of my creativity in an otherwise really boring world. So I like that you can add different pictures to it. You can add different headings to it. I also like that it can be shared with multiple people. We are using this in Department of Pediatrics now to create sort of a notebook experience for our research teams. So if we have a principal investigator with a research laboratory, we started to create this team loop pages for them. We include a team cover page that goes into who are the team members, and it's a good way to review and also reference eventually. We include a page where we link different file links to. For example, for every research investigator, we would have their grant folder, we would have their finance tracker, we would link there, we would have their salary allocation tracker, and anybody in that team who has access, like a divisional administrator, for example, or the investigators themselves, can go to that file page if they are like, where is my stuff? This is where your staff is. And we are also using that to document and track our meeting notes, which comes handy, especially if you are using a bit of the action planner for the next meeting. And then when the next meeting starts, you can pull it up and say, this was done and this was done and this is where this stands. So yeah, I love Loop.
Thank you. I work a lot with Veronica, and I know she uses it a lot, and it even helps, me, eating my own dog food, as they say, right? Practice what you preach type stuff. It super helps me to review things like this before I meet with her, because I just have so many of these type meetings. I don't know where we all left off. So now that we have Loop, and that can change for the next week. So if we have a discussion and I say, hey, check this, this, and this, and then we'll reconvene next week, I can look and see where we are in that flow. And I think it is super helpful to interact with that easily. Yeah, so that is a thing, John, you were just mentioning. If you gave me access to a Loop component, and I access it from the link, is there a way for me to get back to it? Megan is exactly right. You can access it in recent, right? But you can like recent here, but you can link that to your own workspace if you want to. So pages can be in multiple workspaces, just like I showed here. And that is just to recap, because again, I got this question a bunch. When you do that, so this component is now a new page, and this will have separate version history. So if you wanted to go back in time, if somebody messed up this list and you go here and you say version history, this will not apply to this component any longer. You have to click on the component here, and this version history is separate. So just keep that in mind. But you can link it to your own workspace if you want to. Or if it's something that you're working with a bunch, you might request access to the workspace as a whole. This feels like a better question mark alternative to a shared notebook and OneNote. Is that a fair comparison? Yes. So there is definitely some pluses and minuses on this versus OneNote. It's kind of a personal preference type thing in some areas. I just myself like Loop better. I like the more structured outline of it. I don't like how I can click anywhere in OneNote and it just types. I'm OCD like that. I like having a firm edge over here. I like how the sharing works, right? I like how I can paste something anywhere and it just works. I like the meeting notes integration. So for me, Loop is a better option. There are some reasons you might want to stick with OneNote, and we talked about that last time in my previous Tech Tuesday. Those mostly still stand. So, for instance, if you needed offline access for something, I don't believe you can do Loop offline unless you do export it as a PDF, which is a little bit cumbersome, right? So if that's a use case that you really need, that might be a reason to go to OneNote. Some people just like the openness that OneNote provides, and that's totally fine too. But you don't get the collaboration benefits. You can collaborate within a OneNote, of course, but you don't get the multi-platform or multi-application within a platform benefits that Loop provides. So it is a note-taking tool at its core, but I think it is a little bit more advanced in some areas than OneNote is. But just in case anybody has the question, I know of no roadmap to remove OneNote. This is not meant to be a OneNote replacement. It is just a another tool in your toolkit. If you like it, awesome. If not, OneNote is still a totally valid option.
Awesome. We're at time. I think you've answered everyone's questions, Josh. Thank you so much. Just for anybody who logged in late, I will be sending a follow-up email with a recording of this session, as well as the first loop demonstration that we did last year when we introduced the tool. So you'll be getting two recordings to kind of have an overview of everything we've ever talked about on these Tech Tuesday sessions about Loop. I'll also include some links about how to get started with Loop, like I did in our last session. And just some of the things that we talked about today, I'll add some guides to help you navigate through the tool. But I just wanted to thank you all for joining us. Thank you so much for taking some time out to learn more about Loop today. And thank you again to Josh for hosting another great Tech Tuesday session. Really appreciate you all taking some time today, this afternoon. Have a good one, everyone.